So I guess I'm just going to begin talking, and through the beginning, we'll draw everyone else back into the room. So I just want to say, as I begin talking, thank you all for hanging in with us this afternoon and engaging in these somewhat unusual, unconventional workshops. What I've been hearing in talking with people in the lobby is that people are finding it quite exhilarating to be able to have conversations across sectors with people they do not yet know on subjects they may not live every day but maybe have heard about. So appreciate your flexibility and dedication to the mission. And I'm seeing Matt Friedman walk in here, so as soon as he gets in here, the room's about halfway there. So as I noted earlier, along with establishing and growing these cross-sector relationships through participating in these workshops, other outcomes we're seeking are, of course, surfacing the topics that we've been talking about that may be new topics for people, but also coming up with inputs that might be useful for the panels that will be tomorrow and Friday. We'll kind of get more into a more conventional symposium format tomorrow and Friday with some really excellent speakers and panelists. And then also utilizing those inputs for helping to guide our strategic direction and activities over the coming year, because we have some exciting news on that front, which we're not going to daylight exactly today, but we'll keep you coming back for more. But this next workshop, will build on a subject that many of the folks who were here this morning for the Advanced Air Mobility short course will have some greater familiarity with, and those who were not here but were perhaps at the Joby tour will be learning more about. So as I described in the beginning, DART is at its foundation an economic development initiative. And so we're focused on identifying strategic activities and programs that will help grow the economic sectors that we're touching. And included in that are the ones shown on this banner here. And air mobility has been a big focus for us this year and in the past, but especially this year. And agricultural technology a close second in that regard, although really a close first in the regional economy here in Monterey. But what you'll hear about is that, and what we have seen, is that there's a number of states in the country, North Dakota, Oregon, Ohio, Alaska, Virginia, New York, and Oklahoma among them, that have stood up these coordinated activities that are place-based, proactive economic development efforts to support the development, the safe and secure development of UAS and AAM uncrewed aerial systems, that's UAS, operational corridors that are supportive of the growth of those industries. And so these, what we're going to generally call airspace innovation corridors, provide enhanced, among other features, situational awareness, enabling infrastructure, and really they're aimed at supporting, is this on? Okay. Aimed at supporting the growth and the development of these firms. So we think if we're wanting to see more companies like Joby, like parallel flight technologies, like other aviation innovative companies grow in this region, we may want to have such a facility here. And so we're interested in exploring the potential of something like a Central Coast Airspace Innovation Corridor as a beginning to expand on help support the growth and attract other companies here that are, many of whom are already doing operations here, and we've touched on this in past symposia with the Naval Postgraduate School here. They have a quarterly joint interagency field experiment activity that happens down at Camp Roberts that is relevant to this idea. But what we would like to do is extend some form of a similar capability for R&D supportive and safe and secure integration into the national airspace here on the Central Coast. And one point I will make before turning it over to the experts I have behind me, Matt Beatty and John Eberhard, is that as we heard from Clint Harper earlier, you know, there are a number of ways these different size of aircraft are certified for operations, and there are approaches being taken by the market leaders, especially Joby and Archer, where they have a pilot in control of the aircraft. So they're not a UAS. They are a pilot in controlled aircraft and operate under a certain Part 135 license. And what we're talking about with this idea for a UAS-focused airspace integration corridor is something that would support the continued growth and safe and secure integration of UAS into the airspace. So this next workshop will engage participants in an exploration of what airspace innovation corridors are, what considerations and or concerns might be raised when thinking about a potential airspace innovation corridor here on the Central Coast, and we'll leverage some early work that we have started with a thing called the Central Coast Flight Information Exchange, which has been set up in partnership with UC Santa Cruz, Citrus Cider, ATA, Airspace Integration, and DART. So with that as an entree, I'd like to hand it over to Matt Beatty with Advanced Aviation Alignment to set us up further. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Hey, thank you everybody who are here for the long haul. And this is the home stretch, so I decided, hey, let's get back in here around 3 and let's re-engage and think about these things. While we still have some brain power left, I personally, depending on winds aloft, would rather be outside flying a drone. But you know, there's going to be some topics on these questions that are at your table today that may seem highly technical, or you may feel like you have no background in or very little understanding about, and that's okay. That's exactly why we wanted to bring together the different stakeholders that are sitting here today. We need the earlier conversations, engaging the different stakeholders as soon as possible. Yesterday, in fact, we need to not only have the engineering minds with 0 and 1s thinking about these things, but we need our community leaders to be understanding how these things can benefit their community, how they can benefit the constituents, how they can form a economic base and a workforce development base that will continue to thrive with new technologies that are introduced in their community. So myself, Matt Beatty, I am with a consulting firm that's working with DART currently to help facilitate how we're thinking about perhaps opening up an integrated airspace design where we can employ some of these advanced technologies that we've been showcased today and some of the things that we've been talking about. And these are technologies that are bringing new entrants into the national airspace system. Okay, these we're challenging all the traditions and the norms, and there's myriad of different operators using different technologies, flying under different rules within the airspace. Inherent to that is a need to grow robust data services and exchange between those operators. And so what DART's leaned forward in doing already in partnership with UCSC and Citrus and the other actors that we were talking about earlier is creating the foundation for that. And part of that is what my colleague John Eberhardt here is going to talk about, where we are creating an exchange where public data can be leveraged by all actors, regardless of what rules or regulations they're flying under within an integrated airspace. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to John to talk a little bit about what we've done here already and what they're doing at some of the other places that we mentioned.
Thank you very much, Matt. So first question, are we ready to build some things? Because, all right, because that's what this workshop is about. So it's not just theoretical. As Josh and Matt have mentioned, we have the Central Coast Flight Information Exchange up and running. And what we're working on now is filling it up so that we can start to have these next generation operations happen. New aviation, new technologies, new flights. And what we have to figure out is what do we need to put into that bucket to enable these things to happen in our region. So I'll give some examples, right? Because we've got the tables and they're organized by theme. If you look on the back of your badge, there's a number that tells you where you're supposed to go, I think. No, maybe I see someone shaking their head. Maybe that's just for people with stars. All right, just moderators. But find a moderator. The tables have themes. So I'll give you some examples of themes. Weather. Weather is very important for aircraft. How do we need to expand and extend our weather coverage for the region so that you can operate these vehicles throughout the entire region? Hazards. Are there things in our region where we want to tell pilots, we'd really rather you not fly around this? Every time I drive down here and I drive past Moss Landing, that old power station is a really great landmark. It's also something you don't want to fly into. So, sensitive areas. I'll use an example from other places. Schools. Schools are really awesome places for aviation because they tend to be flat, they tend to be open, they're public facilities. But you could also make an argument that you don't necessarily want people coming onto school property, or you want them to get permission. And frankly, any of those answers are acceptable. It's really about what the community wants. So the purpose of this workshop is to start brainstorming and thinking through the types of information and the types of infrastructure that we need to enable advanced aviation operations here on the Central Coast. And I'm very excited about this. You know, we're going to start getting into some real building and engineering when the short, fat, bald guy with the pink socks is up here talking at you. So I'm really excited about what we learn from this because it's actually literally going to guide the work that we're doing between this year and next year's DART Symposium. So thank you, Matt. I'll hand it over to you to kick it off.
Thanks, John. Okay, so again, we have a little bit more sparse of a population that came back in. We lost some folks. I know that we might not get all 14 tables filled. And so what I'd love to do is just to create the best diversity of experience and perspective at the tables as possible. That's my number one goal. I don't need all the questions to be answered. And frankly, the gold in this really is the interaction that you're having in your conversations and the connections you build through a relationship to help us tackle these problems and address these issues going forward. So what I'd love for you to do is just, if you're at a sparse table, maybe there's one, maybe there's two, just jump in on one of the other tables. And there are, again, 2 questions at those tables. But the way we're going to attack these questions in this session is going to be a little simpler, or I guess a little different maybe than from our last one. Because I'm a Marine, and once a Marine, always a Marine. Yeah, I got a beard on, but I keep it simple. I have to keep it very simple. So what I'd like for you to do as you consider these questions is I'd like for you to look at the question, and for the first 20, 25 minutes, I'd like for you to maybe ask why. Why is that important? Why is this question that we're considering important to even consider, the resource to talk about in our communities? And then abstract from those whys and ask, why is that important? And then, at the 25-minute mark, I'll come back up and remind you, but I'd like you to ask the question of, what are the challenges to improving it right now? Or what are the challenges to addressing it right now? What today is standing in our way of improvement in that area or issue? And think about that for the 25 minutes. And at the end of this, and really this is what we call problem framing in certain communities and in design thinking, is I'd like for you to understand a little bit better the question and the issue that we're here to talk about today. So maybe the original question isn't actually the right question to ask. Maybe the original issue that's on that paper isn't the right issue to address. But through your discussion, you're going to help us forge what the right question to ask is and what the real issue is for us to address. So please, again, at the end of that next 25 minutes, we'll give you about 20 minutes to consolidate your themes. We'll have you input them into the forms on the QR that's up here. Actually, not up here again, but we can get the QR form up here again. And for the fields that aren't applicable, just don't worry about those. Let's just get the input in from your group and just put NA in some of the fields that you may not cover down on. So please go ahead, talk amongst yourselves, build those connections, let's share experience, and thank you again. Okay, so I've got 3:21 on my watch, and in 25 minutes, which is 3:46, I'll give you an indication that we're going to switch over to what's the challenge. All right, folks, we're going to start wrapping up our themes that have been drawn out from your discussion. And so if you could do me a favor, and whoever's the recorder, please put your inputs into the form on the QR. Again, if the field doesn't pertain to what you guys came up with, put NA in the field, and just please submit that, and then nominate someone who'd like to come up for maybe the 2 to 3 minutes to discuss the topics that you came up with, and we'll do that in 15 minutes. So thank you. Folks talking about, well, we didn't come up with any solutions. We didn't come up with answers. Well, that, in fact, is not the intent of the exercise. So if we didn't jump to solutions yet, that's fine. We're helping define the problems and the issues more articulately so that we can continue the work going forward on that. So thank you again for everyone who participated vigorously in the exercise this afternoon at the tables and opened your minds to new things today and connected with new people. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the table representative to come on up and communicate a little bit for 2 to 3 minutes max on the outputs from your table. So table 1, I think you guys tackled the question of how might we increase the scope of dialogue with the public and key stakeholders in understanding community needs and challenges related to advanced air mobility. And so I see Raquel coming up. Thank you very much for representing your table.
Thanks. Raquel Gervin, I am the Regional Administrator for the FAA's Western Pacific region. And I just lucked out that I ended up with this question because it's a question that is kind of near and dear to my heart and my job. So we have tables 1 and 2, and we had the privilege of having a group of folks from Mujeres en Acción. So we really gained a lot of insight from talking to them in terms of what would be the best ways to engage. And by the way, in our table, we did have academia, industry, and I think I was the sole government person there. Anyway, I think one of the things that I know I've learned in my job, where we have to do community engagement on other issues associated with aviation noise, trust is a really key piece. And that is something that the community members said was so critical for them. And that the Mujeres en Acción members are folks who are kind of the liaison or the connection between us outsiders and their communities, because their communities sometimes can't read or don't speak the language, or, you know, like there's some indigenous folks, so there's certain barriers, and they're able to get through to those communities. And so I think the lesson that we learned, or at least I certainly took away, is that there are community-based organizations that industry and government and anybody else, all of the stakeholders who need to get their input, would have to work through them and need to get to know them. You know, they talked about listening sessions. They talked about how if we educate them, and it's going to take a long process, that we need to do it from early on, I would say. And you know, we talked about the fact that if it's an industry that wants to start a business, whether it's a vertiport and or an advanced air mobility company, for example, that they really have to engage with them early in the process, and just because it will take a while. They were saying, yeah, we can see that there would be a benefit, but we really would need to, or the communities would really need to take the time to understand the technologies. Let me see. So we talked about public meetings. You know, initially we were saying, well, we could have a website, but then the input that they provided is sometimes, you know, those community members really don't have access to those websites. So again, it is important to have sort of that connective tissue that they provide. To us, one of the questions we tried to ascertain, and I'm not sure that we really got to it, was, well, Monterrey is lucky that they have an organization like Mujeres en Acción, but maybe if we went, you know, if there was another community, they wouldn't have that. And so you know, it's going to be a little bit hit or miss depending on what resources there are in the communities. And again, I'd say, and at least in Monterrey, you have the benefit of that. Hopefully I covered our tables discussion. Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much, Raquel. By the way, I think your shoes, which are amazing, rival John's pink socks. So there's like a pink sock consortium here. All right, so next we're going to go with Table 4. And Table 4, I think, was tackling the question of how might we ensure cooperation and work with our community-based organizations, which we just talked about for a moment here, to identify cumulative impacts of operation and potential benefits to underserved communities. And I think that really digs in on what Raquel was talking about. How do we connect the actual benefits of the technology to the specific needs of the community that you're in? Because those needs are specific, and you need trusted organizations to help with that. So I'm going to hand it off here to Josh to talk more about it.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Matt. So we did our best with this, and I think part of the first piece on my fishbone diagram is that whenever we're talking about these technical issues and flying things and all that, we need to be very clear and have a very common language, because it's complicated stuff, and even for somebody who's somewhat on the sidelines of working with people who are way in the weeds on it, it's not everyday material. So really really the first point was if we're going to support anything having to do with our community-based organizations, we need a common language, or we need to do a lot of education. And then we also centered around some other topics, including who needs to be involved and when. I think this question of engaging people early on makes sense so long as there's a rationale, a basis for people engaging, and we're clear on what we're asking for. So I think that probably just deserves some real thought, strategic thought, as we begin to roll this out. For example, I know, John, in the work you've already been doing with the Central Coast Flight Information Exchange, you have been engaging public safety officials to try to gain their utilization of the system, but they have a real need and see a value for what they're trying to accomplish. So we would have to be able to make that link between our communities and this technology. And we did get into some kind of how to move forward a little bit, including the idea that maybe some small pilot projects are the way forward, and that's kind of a common, a good frame, taking small steps, let's say going from single point-to-point locations with a corridor defined. And then there was really a discussion about, are these corridors we're talking about sort of regular flight paths? And if so, how are they defined? And a number of considerations around that. We also touched on some technical. We did get technical because we have an esteemed national meteorologist in our group. So we did talk about data and technology, but what would some data inputs be for an information infrastructure that would support increased research and development operations in this area? And those included weather, really great weather data, and that was touched on earlier. Clint brought that up. And one of the assets we have in this region is this Naval Research Lab weather station that's out at the Airspace integration site in La Selva Beach. ADSB, which is a thing. It's a technology that communicates between two flying things to let them know that where they are. And so apparently that's a low-cost mechanism for doing so. And then we also thought about land use data if you were trying to plan routes and wanted to avoid heavily populated areas or something like that. And then model inputs, and that's, I think, where Jerry's experience with the Naval Research Lab models comes in very handy. And then I think the last subject we talked about, just in terms of how we might grow a sort of investment and support for this enhanced data infrastructure here on the Central Coast, would be to focus on some priority use cases. Things like public safety, infrastructure inspection, and fire. And because we have a gentleman from the X Prize focused on fire here. And so really looking at the potential of these emerging technologies in UAS to help identify and respond to wildfire, which is a big topic here and in other places around the world like Australia. So I think that's what we talked about, and I know it got a little off course, but I think just the group hung in there well, and I hope that was useful information.
Thanks, Josh. Great. Yeah, so we're going to go to table number 5 for the readout. But yeah, interestingly enough, I mean, the discussion evolved to identifying specific use cases, like what use cases are beneficial in this region, what use cases actually deliver value to the people in that community. Because I've gone on behalf of some drone operators in previous roles to communities to discuss the technology we were bringing to the community. And sometimes that conversation can fall flat unless you're actually delivering value that's wanted or needed and connects with the base core of that community. The technology sometimes can be seen as novel and not connected to the reality of that community unless you can talk about the value that is actually going to help the people and the workforce, the economy in that community. So Christina, come on up.
Okay, thanks. Is this one not working?
It is.
Use that one so I can put my computer down. Hi, everybody. You all look really far away from up here. I'm Christina Watson. I'm with a transportation agency for Monterey County. And it's funny that our two groups had the exact same question. We have completely different answers. So that's cool. So we talked about how we developed an action plan, which is identify how the benefits and or impacts of the project affect the community, how the project is relevant to the community. Benefits include job creation, increased variety of travel modes, reduction of barriers, an increase in commute and travel options someday. Grassroots organizations understand the needs of the communities they represent better than anyone else, and they can be helpful in communicating the benefits of the project to the community and helping the government and the industry to use plain language and avoid jargon, and ensuring that the language is culturally appropriate and increases mutual understanding. So that's the action plan. Big goals. Some of the obstacles, there are quite a lot. Change is hard, first of all. There are a lot of barriers to inclusion, including language and cultural differences. Recruitment is not fully inclusive yet, and the industry and governmental organizations involved need to identify appropriate community-based organizations that can help with the process of making recruitment more inclusive, and government needs to reduce political and regulatory barriers to inclusion, to innovation and inclusion, both. Private industries need to think about reaching out to community-based organizations and recognizing the benefits. So those are some of the obstacles. So the last question is, how do we overcome those? All these entities, the community-based organizations, governments, and industry all have a role in shifting the narrative. Proactive private sector can help overcome the obstacles, and community-based organizations should also not be bashful in presenting ideas to industry and government. That is all I had for that, so thanks.
Thank you, Christina. Thanks, Christina. That was awesome. Yeah, and that also is the point of the exercise, is if you end up tackling the same question, the two groups of people will focus on and deliver interesting insights that may be different. And so thank you for doing that. Okay, so table 7. So table 7 started to get very technical on the digital infrastructure and navigational services. And so, well, you may have also. So we'll hear what the different inputs are from an additional group on this, apparently. But they tackled how might we leverage or improve existing visual flight rules, VFR, airspace design, and infrastructure in the area to support powered lift vehicle routes within the area. And so, Joel?
Thank you. Wow, everyone's really far away. My name's Joel Bittner. I'm here representing the American Mosquito Control Association. I am the UAS chairperson for the UAS committee for our national association, and I'm also the district manager for the Placer Mosquito Control District. So we had a long complicated talk, very lively conversation. So the first part was really kind of trying to identify what this question was, and identifying VFR basically from the perspective of manned aircraft. The way we read it was, how do we look at how current manned aircraft visual flight rules work in the context of now having a bunch of automated or other aerial vehicles in the airspace. We talked about small kind of local cooperative pilot projects, I guess. We used an example actually from my district where we've had to cooperate with manned agricultural aircraft to coordinate when we are using drones to make applications for mosquito control. And it worked on a very small scale. We know who they are and they know who we are, and we put lights on our drones and they can see us. It all kind of works. The problem is that as scale increases and you get more folks in the airspace, you get folks who are not all on the same page, this system kind of starts breaking down rapidly. We did talk about some of the other mechanisms that help visual flight rules deconflict airspace, like lights and notice to airmen and airspace corridors and things like that. But at the end of the day, we all kind of recognize that the ultimate solution would be to, like visual flight rules probably isn't going to work. And that there's going to have to be some sort of wholesale change to how airspace is regulated, and that everybody's going to have to be on the same page, and there's probably going to be a need for some sort of automated component to that, whether or not that's pilot-driven or the aircraft are talking to each other or something along those lines. Then our conversation degraded into lots of other interesting avenues, which was very fun, but that's about it.
Thanks, Joel. Great job. Okay, so interesting. Yeah, that topic of digitalization of information kind of came into play. And yeah, we'll go with table 8. What? Oh, there is a table 8. Yes, indeed. Clint, sorry. You have to stand by just one. Yeah, but interestingly enough, we'll talk a little bit about this in panel tomorrow, but the FAA tends to agree that the info-centric airspace system is something that will be evolving and coming down the road. But we have our interim steps between them.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Sinatukin. I represent the Office of the Secretary of Transportation. The Highly Automated System Safety Center of Excellence. We're a congressionally established office that is, I'm part of a group of national experts across the country to review, assess, and validate highly automated systems across all the transportation modes. However, my other hat is I'm also the DOT program manager lead for the automation strategy of the AM National Strategy and Plan. It's the AM Coordination Leadership Act that was signed into law last year, October 2022. So anyway, ours was on digital infrastructure and surveillance services, which is actually near and dear to my heart, because I actually started way back 20 years, when I went into public service. Some of the newer surface surveillance systems that are actually at the 35 OEP airports, those of you that know ASDX. So how might we leverage existing or improved ground-based sensor infrastructure in the area to support drone or powered lift vehicle routes within the area? So we really looked at it as, we looked at the existing airports here. We looked at Marina, St. Martin, King City, Watsonville, and Hollister. I wanted to also mention we had a good cross-collaboration of people. We have Kenji from the State Department of Oregon. We had the City of Marina Airport. We had academics, and we had 2 industry people. So a lot of thought and collaboration went into it. From the airspace side, we looked at, first of all, we want to scale to autonomy. We want to be a similar type of autonomy testbed corridor like Syracuse is doing. For those of you that don't know what Syracuse is doing, they started out as a UAS test site, and they're moving into the AM corridor, a BV lost corridor, really getting a higher amount of operations, autonomous operations. Beta is there doing autonomous cargo operations. So we wanted to have Monterey and Santa Cruz County be that type of test bed. How would we get investment here, and what would be that cost? So we looked at the gaps and the challenges. We know that there's existing surveillance, primary radar does cover it, but that area 2,000 feet and below, we would need both. If we're getting to that autonomous use case for cargo and passenger carrying, we would need risk mitigation of non-cooperative surveillance, and what that means is radar. However, we would only place more of the high-density surface surveillance radar at the airports because that's where we would get the high-density operations and the ground traffic. Though we do need other sensors for safety around the corridor for risk mitigation, so we looked at investing into ground sensors for that. There's various lower-cost ground sensors for those areas. We also talked a lot about, do we have this network? Do we have the digital network to support this? How would we have operators look at the situational awareness of these flights? We talked about, well, that would require maintenance and a new labor force that we would train. And we also looked at how, let me just look at my notes. So we looked at how to improve that communication infrastructure, and also leveraging the work that the Flight Information Exchange has done. So the Flight Information Exchange would provide the services, so those sensors would publish the data into the Flight Information Exchange, and the subscribers, whether they're the operators or the airport, would be able to utilize that data. Though we looked at the cost of, I think, Syracuse, of their sensor network. I think somebody said that was $110 million, and that is costing Syracuse, and the state of New York is funding that for about $20 million a year. We think that's an incredible cost. I think John came up with a number. Is John here? He thinks he could do it for $1 million. So that sounded like a good cost. We also talked about different investment streams. Am I running over time? Okay, so different investment streams. We talked about potentially the bipartisan infrastructure law would help us at the state level invest in digital infrastructure, because that's an area that the BIL is looking at. SMART grants, working with the FAA on enabling some of these third-party services at the various airports for the traffic management services. And and then John had an operating cost for later on. But so that's really what we looked at. Surface surveillance systems, again, that is the vehicle to infrastructure services. We also talked about the aircraft itself later on would have their own deconfliction services like ACAS-X, which the industry is going on. But we really wanted our ground surveillance infrastructure to enable safety, efficiency, and autonomy. And that's it for us.
Thank you, Saracena. Hey, she's on Team Pink Socks too, but she comes with an official photographer, and if you don't know, Kenji is an amazing photographer and videographer, so check out some of his work. So last table, but definitely not least, we were talking about some weather data exchange. So Clint, come on out and talk to us a little bit about the outputs from your group.
All right. First off, these presentations have been awesome. This is a really great forum, and Table 1 spoke to my heart. Thank you, for that. I'm here to go out on a low note. No. So with the weather data exchange, what we really wanted to do was, we started off by telling a story about, when you pull out your phone and you look at your app, your weather app today, where did all the information come from? How did we get to that point where we have that information? Well, a lot of it was built, based off of a need to understand weather for air traffic, way back in the day. And so we've taken, the lessons that we've learned from, aviation weather, and we've expanded upon that to, come up with solutions for so many more things, from, predicting hurricanes, tornadoes, all that kind of stuff. It all has, roots, that go back at some point, for aviation weather and solving those problems. And so with that, we wanted to take that inspiration and say, what do we need in the future to enable advanced air mobility operations, both the powered lift vehicles and the small UAS vehicles, and how can we take those lessons learned and apply it, in the broadest way possible? And so that's really what kicked this discussion off, was with that. There we go. All right. So that's really what kicked this this whole discussion off, and so we looked at, what are the initial challenges first and foremost? Well, one of the initial challenges is that the FAA is very particular on what kind of data you should use for your aeronautical decision making. And so there's a lot of new technology out there, a lot of exciting sensors, wind scanning lidars, just things that can do some really amazing things, but they have yet to go through the process to get the right approvals to be used in aeronautical decision making. And so that's one of the initial barriers, is figuring out how do we get, a wind scanning lidar approved, to be used at airports, heliports, or along UAS-enabled corridors. So getting, that is the kind of one of the first things that we need to figure out. The next one is the funding. Why do we want to invest in this? What is the issue that we're really trying to solve? How do we quantify, the justification, for this? And so, one of the things that I've learned, in working in Los Angeles and some other areas, and particularly in Utah, one of the recent things that has come to light is that, some of the operators working there are canceling up to 40% of their flights because of weather uncertainty, not because there's an actual weather issue, but because there is a potential for a weather issue. And then when they go back and do a hot wash and look at, the after actions reports, they realize that probably about 20% of those flights, they could have gone. They could have actually, made profit. They could have flown, but because of, safety, they wanted to err on the side of safety, which is a good thing. They decided to not initiate that flight. And so trying to, just really understand, what is that investment? What is that, I guess, a profitability that we can regain, just within the weather system, an aviation system, back into the system, and how does that justify that? And then that's where the conversation got really exciting, because then we started looking at other applications of weather sensing data. We talked about wildfire observations. How do we understand where wildfires are going? How do we get better fidelity on to enable emergency notifications, evacuation notices, feed information to the wildland firefighters so they know what's coming? How do we get higher fidelity of data on toxic algae plumes, that are happening in certain bodies of water? Is there indications that we use? Are there data points that we can look at that's going to help us predict that and understand, and potentially save lives in that matter? Can we understand, certain hotspots in urbanized areas, particularly in underrepresented and marginalized communities, where tree canopies may not provide the same cooling effect as they do in other areas? Can we use that data to inform better urban planning, better urban design standards, and really help a broader range of people? And so these conversations just kept going, and we just kept building, and it got really exciting, to the point to where, we didn't get to the point of actually, coming up with an actual solution. We really just wanted to understand, how can we propagate, how do we come up with a strategy to propagate, I guess what's possible, through a higher fidelity of weather data in the lower altitudes, and what that can do for communities, what that can do for the aviation industry, and what that can do just for wider society, as a whole. And so that's kind of where we, got our conversations, shut off at, but it was really fun, and I really appreciate my table for the exciting dialogue that we had, and would love to continue the conversation with anybody if this is interesting to you at all, after the show or tomorrow or whenever. So I appreciate the time.
Awesome. Thank you, Clint. I'll just say a couple things and then hand it over to Matt, and I promise I will not keep you here long. One, please give yourselves a round of applause. The feedback that came out of these discussions is very high quality, A+ feedback. I work on these types of projects all over the country. And I sit in these types of stakeholder discussions in Pennsylvania and Virginia and Ohio and Alaska and Texas. And what I will say is you all tackle, this is not an easy conversation. It's very complex. There's a lot of different things you have to think about. And as a group, what I will say is you all did a beautiful job of tackling this very challenging conversation. So thank you very much. Just the thinking today, Central Coast is well on its way to solving this problem. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand it off to Matt so we can get out the door and enjoy our evening. Matt, over to you.
Hey, yeah, thanks, John. So again, from the bottom of my heart, I really appreciate your full engagement. And honestly, if you want to take the time to check out some of this technology that we've been thinking really hard about and kind of abstracting on here today, and you want to see it actually in service doing something, on Sunday at CA 66, Monterey Bay Academy, we will have commercial drone operators, recreational drone operators, and some general aviation assets being flown in. Come to that event. It's going to be there on Sunday between 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. You can come out and talk with operators. You can see drones flying. The weather's looking good to break the thermal layer so that we'll be able to actually fly with all the safety constraints in the green. And so just with that, I am going to hand it back over to Josh for the final details for the evening. So thanks, Josh.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Matt and John, for facilitating that. Great to see you all way in the back. I realized after doing all of this that we could have simply brought the microphones up to us, but it's kind of nice having the big vantage point. And yeah, I think sticking with us, this group of people here, the value of this room and the minds here, yourselves and your dedication to the exercises is noteworthy. So thank you for doing that. I'm just going to give a couple pointers for what's happening tomorrow and a request. So the request is that as you leave, take your name badge and put it in the basket that we have up by the front, and then we'll pass out the badges when you come in the morning. So tomorrow morning, we're going to start with a welcome from the Dean of the Business School, and she's going to welcome us here formally to CSUMB. And then we've had a change of speaker for our first keynote. Our man Eric Allison, who's Joby's head of product, has been diverted to an urgent business matter. So they have replaced him with their CFO, Matt Fields, who will be able to give us another perspective on what is happening with Joby and their expansion plans and all of that. So it's going to be a really interesting and engaging keynote that will happen starting about 9:15. And then we will go into a series of workshops. Many of you will be participating on those. And then we've got this excellent panel for over lunch with Raquel and Saracina and Lori Pepper from Calsta with Yolanka. So that's going to be something not to miss. And then really just carrying on. We've got a great set of highly relevant panels, and with your interest and dedication today, I think you'll find even more of that tomorrow, and then again on Friday with another great set of panels. So I think with that, give yourselves a hand. It's a beautiful day. Enjoy some of the afternoon, and we'll see you next tomorrow.